The rain battered the city streets, the downpour relentless and heavy. Streets glistened under streetlights, creating pools of shimmering water that seemed to swallow the night. The bus terminal, usually bustling with activity, was eerily deserted. The only bus left in the lot belonged to John, a veteran driver who had been waiting for hours since the service had been suspended due to the storm. John's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the bus door. Startled, he peered out through the rain-splattered window to see a woman standing there. Her clothes clung to her like a second skin, drenched through, her hair plastered to her face. She looked desperate. Reluctantly, John opened the door. "The service is suspended," he said. "There's no more route tonight." "I know," she replied, her voice barely audible over the roar of the rain. "I need to get to Willow Lane. It's urgent." John hesitated. Willow Lane was a secluded part of town, and he had heard unsettling stories about it. But something about her pleading eyes made him agree. He started the engine, the bus rumbling to life as they pulled away from the terminal. The journey was tense. The wipers struggled against the downpour, their rhythmic sweep barely clearing the view. The woman sat in the back, silent, her presence almost more unnerving than the storm outside. The atmosphere inside the bus grew heavy, each droplet of rain adding to the oppressive sense of foreboding. As they neared Willow Lane, John's heart began to race. He glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, only to find the woman's reflection staring back at him with a chilling, vacant expression. The temperature inside the bus seemed to drop, and a shiver crawled up John's spine. When they finally arrived, Willow Lane appeared as desolate and abandoned as he had imagined. John turned to tell the woman they had reached her destination, but she was no longer in her seat. Panic rose in his chest as he scanned the empty bus. The bus headlights cut through the rain, illuminating a crumbling old house at the end of the lane. Hesitant, John stepped off the bus, his shoes splashing through the puddles. He approached the house, feeling an icy draft that seemed to seep from the very walls. The front door creaked open with a ghostly moan. John's heartbeat thundered in his ears as he stepped inside. The interior was coated in dust, furniture covered in white sheets. The air was thick with a musty smell. The house felt alive with whispers and shadows. Then he saw it. A photograph on a dusty mantel, depicting the same woman who had been on his bus. But the date on the photo was from a week prior, and a newspaper clipping beneath it read, "Local woman dies in mysterious accident." John's breath caught in his throat as he turned around, facing the growing darkness of the house. The shadows began to writhe and twist, coalescing into ghostly figures. The woman from the bus emerged among them, her eyes hollow, her expression a mix of sorrow and anger. As the ghosts advanced, John stumbled backward, desperate to escape. He fled to the bus, but as he looked back, the woman and the ghost seemed to be pulling away, vanishing into the stormy night. With trembling hands, John started the bus and sped away, the rain now a torrent of chaos around him. The bus terminal came into view, and he dashed inside, his nerves frayed. He tried to call the police, but the lines were dead. The next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving a sunlit calm. John returned to the scene to find Willow Lane empty, the house gone, as if it had never been there. Only the rain-soaked bus tracks remained, as evidence of his encounter. John never drove again, haunted by the knowledge that he had transported a ghost to her final resting place. Story the end.
Story number 2.
The rain poured down in relentless sheets as Liam and Sarah's car sputtered to a halt on the middle of the old stone bridge. The engine coughed once, twice, then fell into an eerie silence. Only the sound of rain hitting the roof remained. Sarah glanced at Liam, worry in her eyes. "I told you we should have turned back," she whispered, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. Liam clenched the steering wheel, frustration bubbling up. "I'll check the engine. Just stay here." He stepped into the downpour, vanishing momentarily into the darkness. Sarah's heart raced, The bridge, ancient and crumbling, felt like it was holding secrets, long forgotten by the living. A low hum began, barely audible over the rain. Sarah frowned, peering out the windshield. There, standing motionless in the middle of the bridge, was a figure and a woman, drenched, her pale face illuminated by a nearby streetlight. She stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the car. "Liam?" Sarah called, her voice trembling. Liam reappeared, wiping the rain from his face. "The car's dead," he muttered. "We'll have to call for help." "There's someone on the bridge," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. Liam followed her gaze and froze. The woman hadn't moved. She seemed to be watching them, her dress soaked and clinging to her body, her hair dripping wet. Something about her was off, as if she didn't belong. "Let's get back in the car," Liam said, his voice low. They locked the doors, watching the woman from inside. But she began to walk, slowly, her feet dragged across the wet stone as she approached their car. Sarah's breathing quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. "Liam, drive. Now." "I can't," Liam hissed, desperately turning the key. But the car refused to start. The woman was now just inches away, her face coming into view. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless, and her lips curled into a haunting smile. Suddenly, the car rocked violently, as if something or someone was pushing it. Panic surged through them as the windows fogged up and the sound of wet footsteps surrounded the vehicle. Liam hit the horn, but no sound came. "What's happening?" Sarah screamed, gripping Liam's arm. The temperature inside the car plummeted, and then they saw it. Multiple ghostly hands slapping the windows, leaving wet imprints, as if dozens of spirits were trying to break in. "She's not alone," Liam whispered, eyes wide in terror. The car jolted again, and Sarah let out a scream. In a flash, everything went silent. The woman was gone, as were the hands. But just as Liam started to breathe, they heard it, a distant scream, the sound of metal twisting and the eerie sensation of falling. "This bridge," Sarah said shakily. "There was an accident here. Years ago." They realized too late that the spirits of the bridge weren't merely haunting it. They were repeating their tragedy. Story the end.
Story number 3.
The rain pelted down relentlessly as Jason huddled beneath the crumbling roof of the old railway station. Its decrepit state was a grim testament to the years it had stood abandoned. The station's flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the rain-slicked platform, amplifying the sense of isolation. Jason's breath misted in the chill as he glanced at his watch. Midnight, and no sign of his late-night train. Suddenly, the sound of a distant whistle pierced the downpour, followed by the rumble of an approaching train. Jason squinted through the sheets of rain and saw the outline of an ancient locomotive emerging from the darkness. The train's lights glowed dimly, almost mournfully, as if trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. Despite its age, the train moved with a fluid grace, as though it had a purpose. With no other options, Jason stepped onto the tracks, his heart pounding with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The train came to a stop with a hiss of steam, and the door creaked open. Despite the initial wave of unease, Jason climbed aboard, driven by a mix of dread and determination. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with neglect. Dust-coated seats and cobwebs hung in every corner. The air was thick and stale, tinged with a scent of decay that made Jason's pulse quicken. As he moved further into the car, the flickering overhead lights threw disturbing shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. Jason found an empty seat and took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. The train jolted, and he felt a sense of disorientation. He glanced out the window, but the rain obscured any view of the outside world. He was utterly alone, or so he thought. A low, mournful whistle echoed through the car. Jason turned abruptly, his pulse racing. Figures began to materialize in the dim light, pale, ghostly apparitions dressed in old-fashioned railway uniforms. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions frozen in an endless scream of terror. The ghosts began to approach Jason, their footsteps silent, yet somehow deafening. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding violently against his ribs. Panic surged through him as the train seemed to accelerate, the noise of its wheels grinding louder, more intense. Jason's breath came in ragged gasps. He stumbled down the aisle, desperate to find an exit. The ghosts closed in, their spectral forms flickering with the train's erratic motion. The air grew colder, and a sense of impending doom gripped Jason with icy fingers. Suddenly, the train lurched violently. Jason was thrown against the wall, and everything went dark. When the lights flickered back on, the ghosts were gone. Jason looked around in bewilderment. The train had stopped in the middle of an overgrown, abandoned station, eerily similar to the one where he had first boarded. Jason stumbled off the train, the rain now a light drizzle. The station sign read, Cedar Brook. Last departure, 1924. Jason's heart sank. He had been on a ghost train, trapped in a place where time stood still. As he looked back, the train began to move again, disappearing into the night, leaving behind only the echo of its mournful whistle. The weight of his experience pressed down on him as he walked away, the realization settling in. Jason was not merely a passenger. He was part of the train's tragic journey, a soul lost in the annals of time. The once thrilling adventure had turned into a grim reality, leaving him with a chilling question. Who would be the next to board? Story the end.
Story number 4.
On a stormy night, James trudged through the relentless rain, seeking refuge from the torrential downpour. The only light came from the dim glow of his flashlight, barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. His soaked clothes clung to him, and the cold seeped through his skin, making every step a struggle. As he rounded a bend, he spotted an old, dilapidated house, shrouded in shadows, its windows shattered and door hanging loosely from its hinges. Desperate for shelter, James approached the house. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing a dark interior. His heartbeat quickened, a mix of fear and relief surging through him. He stepped inside, the wooden floorboards groaning under his weight. The air was musty, filled with the scent of mold and decay. A faint, eerie glow illuminated the hallway ahead. James's flashlight flickered, and he followed the light to a room where the glow intensified. His pulse raced as he pushed open the door, revealing a dimly lit parlor. There, in the center of the room, stood a tall, ethereal figure, draped in tattered garments, eyes glowing with a supernatural light. The spirit's voice, cold and echoing, filled the room. "Welcome, traveler. To enter this house, you must solve the mystery hidden within. Fail, and you shall remain here forever." James's throat tightened, his anxiety mounting. "What mystery?" he managed to ask. The spirit pointed to an ornate mirror on the wall, its surface fogged and cracked. "The mirror holds the key. Solve it as riddle before the clock strikes 12, or the ghosts will come for you." James glanced at the ancient clock ticking ominously in the corner. Its hands moved with excruciating slowness, each second feeling like an eternity. He approached the mirror, its surface reflecting the dim light in strange, unsettling patterns. A series of symbols and words were etched into the glass, but they made no immediate sense to him. As James studied the mirror, he heard whispers around him, growing louder and more frantic. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist. His breath came in ragged gasps, and sweat dripped from his brow despite the chill. He could feel the presence of unseen eyes watching him, and every tick of the clock seemed to amplify his growing dread. He focused on the symbols, trying to make sense of their arrangement. The whispers became louder, forming incoherent sentences that only heightened his fear. The room's atmosphere thickened with an oppressive weight, and James's heart pounded furiously. As the clock neared midnight, panic set in. He grasped at the symbols, desperately trying to decipher their meaning. Suddenly, a realization struck him. The symbols were an anagram, a hidden message waiting to be rearranged. With trembling hands, he unscrambled the letters, revealing a phrase. The answer lies in the past. The mirror's surface began to ripple and shift, revealing an old photograph behind it. The photograph showed a family, their faces eerily familiar. The spirit's voice echoed again. The past holds the truth. James's eyes widened in shock. The photograph was of his own family, but there was something different. An unfamiliar, spectral figure standing beside them. His heart raced as he realized the spirit was a manifestation of his own fears, haunting him with unresolved guilt from his past. With a final desperate effort, James faced the mirror and spoke the truth he had been avoiding. I failed to protect those I loved. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. The spirit's form shimmered and began to fade. The clock struck 12, but the ghosts did not attack. Instead, the house seemed to release him, the door opening once more to the stormy night outside. James stepped into the rain, his heart still pounding, but his burden lighter. He looked back at the house, now merely an old, abandoned structure in the rain, and walked away with a sense of relief and resolution. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The rain battered the old hospital's dilapidated facade, each drop a reminder of the storm's fury. Victor's heartbeat quickened as he approached the entrance, the once grand structure now an eerie silhouette against the tempestuous sky. He'd heard rumors of the hospital's dark past, of patients who vanished, never to be seen again. Tonight, curiosity drove him beyond the rotting doors, seeking answers in the shadows. The moment he stepped inside, the air turned frigid. The light from his flashlight cast long, jittery shadows that danced across the cracked walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling under the weight of its own decay. Every step Victor took echoed like a hollow whisper, his breath coming out in visible puffs. As he ventured deeper, the oppressive gloom thickened. The flashlight's beam wavered, and Victor's sense of unease grew with each passing corridor. His hands trembled, and the weight of unseen eyes bore down on him, heightening his anxiety. He tried to steady his racing heart, but the sound of dripping water seemed to come from every corner, amplifying his growing fear. Victor stumbled upon a dusty nurse's station. Papers scattered across the desk seemed to whisper forgotten secrets. His flashlight flickered, casting unsettling patterns on the walls. Just then, he heard a faint, mournful wail, a sound so heart-wrenching it froze him in place. The wail grew louder, converging into a chorus of anguished cries. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the corridor. Shadows elongated and twisted, forming indistinct shapes. Victor's breath caught in his throat as he realized these shapes were not merely figments of his imagination. They were the forms of people, their eyes hollow, their faces twisted in eternal suffering. The spirits began to emerge from the darkness, their movements jerky and unnatural. Victor's heartbeat thundered in his chest as he backed away, but the spirits followed, their mournful cries morphing into shrill screams. They were trapped in a nightmarish loop, forever reliving their final, agonizing moments. Victor's flashlight flickered violently, then died, plunging him into complete darkness. Panic surged through him. The oppressive silence was now punctuated by the ghostly whispers and the soft shuffle of spectral feet. His heartbeat raced uncontrollably as he stumbled through the dark, desperately searching for an exit. The ghosts closed in, their icy fingers grazing his skin, sending waves of terror through him. He could feel their despair, their need for release. He turned a corner and saw a faint, eerie glow coming from an old operating room. Summoning every ounce of courage, he approached it, praying for a way out. Inside the room, a single, flickering light illuminated a wall covered in old photographs and medical records. In the dim light, Victor's eyes widened in horror. The photos showed patients with terrified expressions, each one bearing the same anguished look as the spirits chasing him. It became clear that these were the souls of the hospital's past victims, eternally bound to this place. In a sudden horrifying revelation, Victor noticed a single photograph with a familiar face, his own. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. He was destined to join them, forever trapped within these walls. His breath quickened, and the temperature dropped even further as the ghosts closed in, their cries now a cacophony of despair. Just as the spirits reached out to claim him, the hospital's old generator roared to life, flooding the room with light. The ghosts recoiled, their forms dissipating into the air like mist. Victor's flashlight flickered back on, and he ran, stumbling through the corridors until he finally burst through the front doors and into the storm. The rain pounded against him as he fled into the night, his heart still racing and his breath ragged. He glanced back once, but the hospital was already fading into the distance, its spectral inhabitants silenced for now. Victor knew he'd never return, but he'd carry the memory of that night, the night he encountered the restless souls of the old hospital. Story the end.